All right, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to our REDCap session. Thanks for joining us, and sorry you had to listen to me for a little bit longer. Special apologies to my group who are really stuck with me. So we thought it would be helpful, given that so many of you are utilizing REDCap for your projects and probably are going to encounter REDCap in the future for a multitude of other projects, whether or not your current study is appropriate for REDCap. We thought it would be helpful to do another quick overview. Just a reminder, there is a link online to one of my last year's recording of a REDCap workshop. So I'll just do, so there might be a little bit of repetition if you've already watched some of that. So I'm going to do a brief overview of giving you the lay of the land for REDCap. And then what I'd like you all to think about preemptively, and you can put it in the chat. Dr. Jibo and Dr. Atkinson can help make sure that I get your responses, but if there's like a specific variable that you wanted to play around with, we could put into our database and test out a few things. If you had questions about the best way to build some of your the data research forms or the forms that you're going to be entering into, we can do that all together. So with no further ado, Kelly, can you confirm that you see my REDCap screen?
I do.
Okay, awesome. Sounds good. And then I hit record, I believe. Yep. Okay, sounds good. So this will be recorded to the cloud. All right. So if you could just do a quick raise of hands via, the little emoji thing. How many of you are using REDCap for your projects? Okay. All right. So I see a smattering of hands, maybe a little bit more than maybe folks haven't gotten a chance to get to the emoji. So that's great. So this will be helpful to people who are actively using REDCap, but then, like I said, many of you will be encountering REDCap in some way, shape, or form in the future. So our Johns Hopkins REDCap interface is here. This is redcap.jhu.edu. So that's the address to always refer to and come back to. And when you go to redcap.jhu.edu, you're going to get these 6 cute little puzzle pieces. The My REDCap Projects one is going to be your portal to enter anytime you're trying to get to your existing project. However, for those of you who haven't started a REDCap project yet, you're going to be most interested in getting started with REDCap, which is always a good resource. And then this green puzzle piece, which is going to be requesting a new REDCap project. If your PI already has a REDCap project that they want you to actually have access to, then you can go to request REDCap user account and they can help you facilitate that. And then there's this purple piece that's for support systems. So I have to say the REDCap support is outstanding. Scott Carey is the person assigned to helping all School of Medicine users. And then Andre Hackman, who some of you will interact with, is on the School of Public Health side, and they're both outstanding. And there's always someone manning the REDCap help desk. So if you send an email to redcap@jhu.edu, they will make sure that you get the help that you need. And I can tell you that they almost always respond to me within 1 to 2 hours, especially like on the middle of a active study that's happening the day of. They've been extraordinarily helpful. So just really quick, let me just show you what they have on the getting started with REDCap here. So essentially, it's a really nice step-by-step. It goes through exactly what you need to know. They have a link with some of the training videos that you have access to. And then it goes through how do you request your REDCap project, what do you need to be able to provide to them, and then a few other nuances here and a few things to consider as you get started. So I would highly suggest reading this, but I'm going to show you some other resources that will be very helpful. So just really quickly, let's go through how to request a new REDCap project. I did confirm with Andre Hackman how the process would go for those of you who are medical students starting a new project where you have a medicine PI or a school public health PI, for example, and you don't have funding for a REDCap project. And that's absolutely fine. All of you, for the most part, I believe, are doing research projects that involve an IRB process. If you don't have an IRB process associated with your project, make sure you've talked to one of your faculty advisors about this to make sure that you don't need to have one. You won't get a REDCap project unless there is an IRB in progress. It doesn't have to be approved for you to start the process. I'll go through that a bit more. So let's just quickly, because unfortunately this does not let you go to the next forms unless you fill in data. So if you're starting fresh, you're going to start a new REDCap project. I'll just put in my info really fast. Bear with me. So you will not have a REDCap user ID. So you're going to go to not applicable because you're not actively associated with the project. Then you're going to go to the next page and you're going to request a new REDCap project. Of course, you can use this form for other reasons as well. Pick School of Medicine. And, you know, put where your PI is affiliated with. Most of you are working with School of Medicine PIs. Will this project collect patient-level COVID-19 data? I'm assuming most of you aren't working with COVID-specific data, but it's possible, so you can say yes if that's the case. And then wherever your PI is a faculty member, so I'm going to put anesthesia critical care medicine, and this is the key here. So the REDCap has multiple levels of user interfaces. I, for example, have a silver plan because I have a ton of different projects and need a lot of space on the REDCap server. So I pay $50 a month for that option. However, if you have a research project that is associated with an IRB and limited to no funding, everyone has access to what we call the bronze plan. The bronze plan is free. You have limited amounts of like help support, but you guys won't need much, you know, one-to-one REDCap support for the projects that you're doing. So you're going to pick clinical research here, and then bronze, no support. You're requesting bronze. Is this a secondary project to another REDCap under the same IRB? I know some of my students do have this situation potentially, so something to consider. Maybe you're going to be adding a new form to an existing parent project. And then this is all pretty straightforward. Is the grant funded? Yes. Is a project grant funded? Yes or no? How many participants do you anticipate entering? This doesn't mean prospective studies necessarily. Like if you're going to be entering data for 250 patients in a retrospective study, then you pick 200 to 299. When do you anticipate data collection will be complete? Pick a rough estimate based on the MSRS, and then the anticipated project duration. So I won't continue to go through that in the interest of time, but that's pretty much all the information you need. And as long as there is an IRB pending and you have an IRB number, every IRB application has an assigned number, whether or not it's actually been approved. So as long as you can provide that, they will ask you for that follow-up when you get closer to actually putting the project into production. So we can talk about that some more. Any questions in the chat thus far, Kelly or Meredith?
All good.
Okay, great. So
there's actually one. Does the use of REDCap for data collection need to be approved by the IRB as well?
Oh, actually, the IRB will ask you, how are you collecting data? They want to know that you're using Safe Desktop and or REDCap to collect your data. So they love REDCap because they know it's an approved server, it's protected, the data stays within REDCap. So yes, you need to let the IRB know how you're doing it because they will ask you anyway, and they will be happy when you say REDCap on Safe Desktop. That is the gold standard for most of your data collection. Great question. Okay, please do, Dr. Ajibo and Dr. Atkinson, interrupt me at any time if I need to answer any other questions. So now you have a project started. So what'll happen is after you put in your project request, they'll reach out if they have any specific questions for you. But usually what happens is within a day, you get an email that says your project has been approved and we've created it. So what is that going to look like for you? That's when you're going to go to My REDCap Projects. And the nice thing that REDCap is that Hopkins folks have done now is it's all done through your JET ID. It used to be you had a separate login and password, and we all know how annoying that is to have 50 million logins and passwords. So it's all done through your JET ID. Now, please don't be overwhelmed by my REDCap. These are all my different projects, but we're going to focus on this section here called test projects. I do want to point out, and I brought this up in the recording from before as well, I use REDCap for all of my studies. And the reason is it's great for retrospective studies. It's great for prospective studies. It's great for multi-center clinical trials, multi-center prevalence studies. And that's what you see here. I have an international point prevalence study that was done in multiple countries. We actually have a translation. One of my research coordinators actually translated the entire REDCap database into Portuguese, and we have actually questionnaire data in Portuguese for that study. So it's very versatile. You can also do surveys. So you can actually, like, I think many of you have seen Qualtrics or, Google surveys, et cetera. You can do surveys through REDCap. And again, it's a great way of validating data as it gets entered. And we're going to talk about that a lot. So what I'm going to do is first start with a project that's existing so I can show you why we encourage you all to use REDCap and what are the advantages. And then what we're going to do is Andre Hackman set up a bunch of different test projects for me that we could use together that offer some template options. So you're not starting from scratch, but we can also start from scratch as well, and we can work through things. So if there's something you want to try or put in, this would be the time to start putting stuff in the chat, and we'll get to them when the time is right. So I'm going to pick this project called dexmedetomidine dose and duration in the pediatric intensive care unit. I'm picking this project because this was a retrospective observational study. So this was done by one of our PICU fellows who wanted to understand whether the dose and duration of dexmedetomidine, which is a sedative we use in the PICU, was associated with different outcomes. So the nice thing is it's a 65 patient cohort, and I think many of you will be doing studies that kind of are in that range. And there's a lot of data that needed to be collected as part of it from the chart. So let's go through the layout and the interface. Again, this is all recorded, so you'll be able to go back to this at any given time. So this will always take you back to your list of projects. So that's the main menu, I guess. But this is really your key here: project home, project setup, designer, dictionary, and codebook. We'll come back here in a second. Don't worry too much about the scheduling. The record status dashboard is also going to be important. And then down in this menu, for those of you who are just now learning REDCap, this is going to be the money button, the data exports, reports, and stats when that time comes. The rest of this is pretty advanced in the sense of they'll be more for multi-center studies or when you need multiple people who are going to be working on the project. There's also like a Zoom clinic registration down here for help, et cetera, and lots of help buttons all over the place. All right, so let's go to Project Home. Just brings you back right to the screen. And what you see here is these are the current people who are approved to actually enter this database and do something with it. As I said, these are the number of different records that are there. And then you can go to Project Setup also from this tab. And this is where are all the various options for your actual project. So for example, modify project title and purpose. This doesn't change anything for the study itself. What it does is it actually changes how it looks in REDCap. So you may or may not want to change that at any given time. This is the key. Go to the online designer and the data dictionary, and you'll see the designer and data dictionary are also over here. So there's some redundancy, so you can find stuff pretty easily. And this is down here is where you actually move your project into production. So the nice thing about REDCap is you can work with stuff as long as you want until you're happy, and then you can actually go into a testing phase and then make sure that you're happy with it and then move it officially into production so other people can use it. That becomes really important, the testing phase, especially for survey studies, where you're actually going to be sending it to other people. It's one thing if you're entering the data on your own, then you're going to figure out pretty quickly whether you need to modify stuff, and it's not a big deal. But if other people are going to be doing it, it's really important that you've tested the project thoroughly. So let's go to the data dictionary. So you guys have heard us talk about this a lot in terms of why it's great to use REDCap, and that's because REDCap does the work for you. So if you hit download the current data dictionary, remember this is an existing project. Kelly, you see an Excel sheet now? So what you see here is the data dictionary that is exported directly from REDCap. And this is basically the work that this fellow did already in terms of building the forms. And it tells you what the variable names are, what the forms are, where it comes from, what type of variable it is in terms of text drop down, radio button, what does it actually mean, the variable, and then what are the different value labels for that variable. So this is very important because it's important to have a clean data dictionary that you can refer to at any given time. So that's one thing.
Sapna,
Yeah.
Could you maybe mention about string versus numeric versus some of the other types of variables, so how that shows up as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So in this case, if it says text, that means that it's going to convert to a string variable. So remember in Stata yesterday, we talked about string is anything that can't be quantitatively analyzed. So if you were to export this data as is, it would not be able to, and obviously quantitatively analyze first name. So here text equates to a string variable. And anything else here, a radio button or a checkbox actually equates to a numeric variable. And I'll show you actually what that means in a second. Great question, thank you. So we're gonna go to the code book here. The code book is actually exactly the same as the data dictionary, except it's a little bit of a prettier format for the data dictionary than this like Excel spreadsheet that has all this stuff. And so this is the same thing, right? You see MRN ID, it tells you what the field label is and whether it's a text or string variable, and whether or not it's identifying information. So what does that mean? That means that is this something that is not HIPAA compliant, in the sense that if you have someone's medical record number, you can recognize who they are, right? First name, last name, date of birth, these are identifiers. And the reason that we designate them as identifiers, and I'll show you how to do that, is because when you export the data, you have the option of not exporting the identifying information. So if I want to share a truly de-identified data set with somebody, I can do that and not have to worry about deleting columns and rows, etc. So sex, race, these are examples of categorical variables, right? So, and these are numeric. So what we've done is we've assigned 0 for female and 1 for male. Often it's the opposite, 0 for male and 1 for female. And then you can see here also radio buttons are categorical variables. These are all text, etc. So this is a nice way if you wanted to just look at, have a PDF in front of you for all of the different variables. This is there. So I'll pause there. Any questions up to this point before we kind of dig into what the designer looks like for this project?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay, thanks. All right, so let's go to the designer. So remember, this is a live in production project. So if I wanted to make changes to it actively, I would have to enter into draft mode. So I'm going to do that. Draft mode doesn't change anything actively about the data that you've already collected. All it means is that you're going to make changes, and then you're going to have to get REDCap to approve those changes over time. So let's go to this field here. So what this tells you is that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different CRFs, clinical research forms, for this study. We decided to have one specific to demographics, one specific to dexmedetomidine, one to other sedatives and analgesics, one to withdrawal type data, and one for adrenal suppression. The nice thing about having separate forms is it keeps you a bit more organized, and also maybe you decide that every Monday is going to be your day to focus on entering demographics for patients. Often you'll want to do everything in one fell swoop if you're in a patient's chart, but depends on how you've organized yourself. So we're going to go to the demographics form here. And this is what the designer looks like. So you can see here, very similar, right, to what we already saw in the data dictionary and code book. And then if you were to click on this, you'll see that this is how we set this up. So this is a text box type variable. First name is a string variable or text box. This is the variable name, first name. Does it require validation? So what does that mean? Do we want it to always be a certain way? Do we want it to be a 3-integer number? Obviously, first name is not going to have validation because it could be anything. Is it required? Often the answer is going to be yes. Is it an identifier? We talked about that. Yes. And then you can put under here anything you want to put under the notes. Now remember, most of you are making these forms for yourselves, but the more information you have, the better. And then if someone is helping or you need someone to look at it, they can help you as well. So that is what the designer looks like for this study. And don't worry, we're going to go and actually look at what you would do from scratch. I just wanted to show you what the end result or end game looks like. All right. So really quick, I also want to show you data exports. We talked about this yesterday about exporting data into REDCap. I'm sorry, exporting data to put it into Stata. But this is also a nice way for you guys, and I love doing this, especially for data that I can look at while the study's ongoing, is to use this button called Stats and Charts. So the stats and charts button essentially gives you an option of like having a basic summary of your data that's aggregated. So what this tells me when I pick the demographic stats and charts is I have 65 first names and last names. None of them are missing, similar to what we did in Stata, right? Like missing data. It tells me that 41% are female and basically does a nice like kind of cross-sectional overview of your data. Basically the stuff that you're going to be doing in Stata. Now, does that mean you can use this as a replacement for your data analysis for MSRS? Probably not. It probably means that you haven't delved into your data enough because this is all, again, very descriptive data of just what you have. It's not doing any comparisons or anything like that. So this is a nice way to kind of get trends in your data, see if maybe there are some issues, and also figure out how many are missing. I think that these templates are awesome. In fact, I didn't know these templates existed when I started these projects, so I would have used them in retrospect, and I will start using them moving forward. So there are a bunch of different templates available. I asked Andre to give us the templates that would be most helpful to all of you. So there is a basic demography template here. So what does that mean? You can ask when you get your new REDCap project and say, I want these templates added to my project. And so you can say basic demography. So what does that mean? That means that this form is already set up in many ways, and you might want to make some changes to it. So I'm going to click on that. So right now there's only one form in this project. You can add other forms, and we'll talk about why you would want to do that in a second. And the nice thing about this is it's already set up for very basic things, and you may or may not need some of these. So study ID, every one of your patients should have a study ID associated with them when you enter them. Try to avoid using medical record numbers as your study IDs. You should have a separate study ID, but then also enter the MRN if that's part of your data collection. So let's go into first name here. You can see it's already set up, and the nice thing is since you have some basic stuff set up, you can modify it accordingly. So maybe you don't want this to say first name, maybe you want this to say middle name. So you change it to middle name, you change the variable name to middle name. And then same thing, no validation. You want it to be required. You know it's an identifier. And then you can put a little note here that says only put the middle name. I'm just making stuff up as we go. And so I'll show you what that looks like. When you're entering data into the form, it's actually going to look exactly like this. So let's say you don't want street, city, state, and zip. So you can get rid of that. So if you don't want it, just get rid of it, delete, done, no more. So any of these that you don't want, you can change, you can modify. Let's go to race. Maybe race is incomplete and you wanted to add something here. This is what we call a categorical variable again. And so in this case, what they have done for race is it's a multiple choice drop-down list. So what does that mean? You have a couple options for, it's basically how you want it to look. So it can either be a multiple choice drop-down list with a single answer or a multiple choice radio button with a single answer. But that also means since you're making it a multiple choice that you need to actually code each of the different options. And so as we saw in Stata, you always have a reference, which is usually 0. And then you have multiple other numbers that you use for the other categories, and they have to be in progression, numeric, so that when you export into statistical analysis packages, it'll actually translate. And so here that you can see how they've set this up here, and it goes 0 through 6, and you can modify any of these as you see fit. You can put, again, a qualifier here that's really just text to tell the person entering data, this is not an identifier. Is it required? Yes. And you can change the variable names. And remember, keep the variable name short and sweet and lowercase for the purposes of Stata. So right now, this is a drop down. Let's say you want to change it to a radio button. Again, this is probably all like aesthetics, right? How you want it to look. This might be more important when you're sending surveys. So, you know, how do you want it to look for surveys specifically? But this is really all your own preference. So this is the basic demographics form. Same thing with gender. It's currently set as 0 female, 1 male. And again, you can change it to be drop down or radio button. And then there's other options here, which we'll go through in a second. So any questions about the demographic form? you guys are all going to want a demographic form. So whether you build your own demographic form or use the template, I suggest you starting with the template and then deleting what you don't want and adding additional or modifying the existing things so that it reflects what you need. Okay. Steve, anything else in the chat? Nope. Okay, great. All right, so moving on, let's go back to the other options you have for templates. So here you have, let's see, there's a single survey, let's do a test chart review project. So a lot of you are doing chart views. So we're gonna go back to the designer, and you can see here, this one actually has a demographic set up, but also a clinical information sheet set up as well. So, oh, right now this one has no fields, but essentially what I wanted to show you here is that, you know, you might decide you only need two forms. You have a demographics form and a clinical information form. So what other forms might you need? And this is when we're going to start like playing around with different types of projects and different types of variables. So if someone wants to throw in the chat or unmute themselves and tell me like a variable that they'd like to add to a form or a project. It's clear as mud. Anyone have any suggestions?
There's someone put age in the chat.
Okay.
Or yes, age.
Okay, age. So let us go to, we're just going to start a brand new blank project then. I think that would be the most helpful thing, because then you guys can start to work through that. Let's see which one of these was training project. Just chart review. Bear with me, guys. Oh, that's the same one. Oh, okay, let's create a new instrument from scratch. So this is anytime you want to create a new form, you can add an instrument here, and we're going to call it okay, so this is going to be our blank demographics form. All right, so this is when you're starting completely from scratch. You don't have anything else in there, no template, etc. So let's go to add a field. So how do we want to enter age? What type of variable is age, or could age be? I love age because it's a good topic. It's a good topic for discussion. So is age a continuous variable or a categorical variable, or both? It can be both, exactly. Now, we talked about this in my group a bit, and I think we might have mentioned it in the larger group. Typically, what is the best way to collect age? Should you collect it as a continuous variable, or should you collect it as a categorical variable? I'm watching the chat now, so you can just put it in there. Continuous. All right, David, can I ask you to unmute and say why because we talked about this specifically, why you would always choose to enter it as a continuous variable?
Yeah, I think it just affords you more granularity with the data. So, and you know, if you start off as a categorical variable, and you end up deciding that you may want to change what the cutoff is at a certain point, it's much more difficult to do that than if you just started off with collecting continuous variable, and then you can always create new cutoffs from that.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, David. Sorry to put you on the spot, but that was perfectly put. You always want to start in REDCap when you're extracting data from Epic. Look, all of us who've done it know it's not easy, and so it's a lot of work. It's a lot of time. So if you're extracting data from Epic, you want to make sure you collect the data in the most granular form that it's available, because you can always make it less granular for the purposes of your analysis, but you can't go the other way around. So it would make no sense if you have a 52-year-old and that's what it says in Epic, and it says 52.3 or whatever, that to put in there that they are between 30 and 60 years old as a categorical variable, because you completely lose that granularity. So
can I add one other?
Yeah, please, Kelly, go ahead.
So it's also a time-dependent variable, right? So it depends on when you're abstracting it, and if you want to look at what the person's age is today or what it was during an event that they may have happened in the past. So it's important to think about what time point you are considering this specific variable. It's also going to be important for other variables where you're looking at for potentially presence or absence of a comorbidity, where they may have that thing now, but when they came for their original surgery or potential intervention, they did not. So it's very important to think about what are the surrounding factors, and what time point do you want to be recording your data so that you know it's not today when you're abstracting it on June 9th, it's what were they when the actual event occurred.
Oh, thanks. That's hugely important and helpful. And I think what Dr. Jibo just mentioned is really important in terms of like she said, the time varying variables. So you may have a demographics form for admission. So admission demographics, and then maybe there's a what the next visit was. Maybe you're looking at clinic visits, right? And so their age at their clinic visits are going to vary, and you don't necessarily have a consistent time point for those clinic visits. So you might want to have age in each and every single one of those clinic visit forms as well. So really, really important. Thank you. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, one more. So sometimes one way around it is to record date of birth, and then you can calculate an age when you have the date of the visit or the date of the hospitalization. So age is really important, but sometimes date of birth is actually one way that allows you the flexibility later on to be able to calculate. I'm sorry.
And that's why, it's please interrupt all three of you with any of these tidbits. And that's why it's really important to make sure that there is some time identifier associated with each of your forms, especially if they're different time points. If they're all on one day, there's one date, perfect. But if there are multiple forms that include multiple days, then you need to make sure either the date's in there and that you have a date of birth to reference, as Dr. Jibo said, or some other variable that will tell you like exactly what the time point is. All right, so I'm watching the chat here. So we have age, we talked about granularity. So which of these options would you think would fit best? I know it seems obvious, but just put it in the chat. I'll take the first comer. Is it a text box? Is it a multiple choice? Is it a yes, no? It's a text box. Exactly. Thanks, Emmanuel. So it's a text box, and the text box is going to be what you're using for a lot of your data. So essentially here, we're going to call this variable, let's just call it age. Okay. And then let's see, you're going to have a validation. So what do we want age to be validated as? Is this a variable that would be helpful to validate? Yes, no, maybe? Yes, right? Because you don't want someone to be 999 years old. You don't want someone accidentally entering 250, right? So there are certain numbers that seem totally reasonable, and you would want someone to get an error message if they accidentally entered something that didn't make sense, so that when you export the data, it all is clean already. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to, there's multiple options. So you can do, we can just pick number if you just wanted to do that. If you wanted it to be an integer where there wasn't like 0.3 or 0.4, you could do that as well. So there's definitely many options. So let's say number 1 decimal place, okay? And so I'm a pediatric intensivist. I probably am only doing studies that engage patients between the ages of 0 and 25. So the value you provided could not be validated because it does not follow the expected format. Interesting. So what it's telling me is I said that I wanted 1 decimal place, so I have to put in 0.0 to 25.0. But if you decide that you just want a number, which is probably the case, and then you could just do 0 to 25. And then don't worry about select ontology service. I want age to be included for everyone. Age may or may not be an identifier. It depends if there's a date associated with it. So in this case, I'm just going to choose yes to be careful and say, please enter age. So you could just put a field note here of age at admission. Hit save. And so what happened here? So interestingly, it's missing like what it's actually called. So what I did wrong is I didn't provide it with a field label. So I'm going to put age here. And the nice thing is I can also put as much detail as I want. So I can say age in months or age at admission. And then if I do that, it saves it. And so now you have age and admission. So when you go into this person's chart, you're going to actually enter their age. So let's see what happens if I put in something that was outside of our limit. So I'm going to put 77. Oh, this isn't live yet, so it's not going to actually tell me that it's wrong. Oh, the value provided is outside the suggested range, 0 to 25. It's admissible, but you may wish to double check it. So it's a nice, it'll check you as you go along. So it's really nicely done. Okay, great. So we got age, one down. Oh, let me make it happy again. Okay, others.
There's a comment about comorbidity, specifically diabetes.
Okay, great. So let's do that one. So what would that be? So if your specific variable is going to be history of diabetes, yes or no, which of these would you pick? I'll just go. Thank you. It's, yeah, Michelle, it's yes, no. So again, this is where you provide history of diabetes, question mark. And then the nice thing is that REDCap knows, since this is a yes, no question, it's actually going to code 1 as yes and 0 as no. And then again, I'm just going to say diabetes history. So it's an informative variable name. Is it required? Yes. Is it an identifier? No. And then here's where you might want to add some more text or information if someone's helping you with this data entry. So history of diabetes at, you know, whatever the qualifier is, or history of diabetes at admission or something like that. But so we're going to hit save. And then here you have it, history of diabetes, yes or no. And then you have your 0, 1 variable. So this is a categorical variable. One field that you might want to add here is a section header. So there's actually begin a new section. This is the demographics form. You just save that. So it'll, and this is more helpful when you're doing surveys, because it'll make it pretty. It'll make it look like there's sections to your surveys, etc. Would something like year of graduation from medical school be considered identifiable? I'm going to turn to my faculty colleagues to think through this. I think the answer would be no, but Steve, I see you unmuted. What do you think?
I would also say no. Now, one of the challenges is that the more characteristics you have in your data set, you can then come back and identify who said that. And so, for instance, if you look at some of the genetic analyses that are out there, people actually have identified themselves from their own haplotype and all the other information. So we try our best in these data sets not to make data identifiable. And there is a list of what's considered protected health information, or PHI, that would identify people, but age, year of graduation would not be one of those categories. Date of birth is, and so if you make age, you want to make sure that you use the floor command in Stata to make it the age in an integer format from their date of birth, and then eventually strip out their date of birth from that person. One other thing that I just wanted to comment on while I'm unmuted is, yeah, so Dr. Kudchadkar had on here about sort of that she could put something outside of the range of 25 and REDCap would allow it. And so one of the benefits of that is you can actually have a code for what would be considered missing. And so for instance, if you have your code, it's like, I looked for age, but I, for the heck of me, couldn't find age for this person. I'm going to code their thing as 999. So something that's not meaningful, that's not a valid response. But for you, you'll see that, yes, I looked for that person's variable and I couldn't find it. So that's my shorthand for me saying that this has a missing variable name. And that's what we often will do in REDCap and other databases to denote that we looked, but it wasn't there.
Perfect, thank you. All right, keep throwing me some variables. We got a good continuous variable. We got a yes, no categorical variable. What else you got? So Emmanuel, for yours, for example, if you wanted to do year of graduation from medical school, that's going to be a text box, right? It could be a date, but it's not. If it's just a year, it's probably not as important. So, and dates and times are text boxes anyway. So med school grad year, I'm just throwing random variables in. So you could actually enable auto naming of variables based on the field label. So you can test that out and see if you like it. I'm going to say no because I don't want it to change everything for all of my studies. So validation here, you have, I think, year somewhere in here. Let's see, date, time, seconds. Do you guys see just a year? So in this case, it's going to be an integer because you can just say, you know, 1975 to 2021 or something like that. And that's going to be your, so that's how you would do it for your graduation from medical school. Okay. All right. I'm looking in the chat at what other variables would you like to test out? Highest level of education. Great. Okay, so let's add that field. So what category would that go under? All right, I don't see anything being typed in the chat, so I'm a multiple choice. Thank you, Carrington. So, so we're gonna do multiple choice. I'll just pick radio buttons because I like radio buttons. So, what is the patient's highest level of education at the time of admission? Right? Because for me as a pediatrician, that might be kind of important, right? Like then you could say they're in second grade or fourth grade or whatnot. But I know what most of you are going to be looking at. So this is a categorical variable that will potentially have multiple options, right? So how do you set that up? Well, if you're doing it from scratch, and I'll show you, there's actually templates that have a lot of this already set up. You make sure you always have a reference, and then you put a number, whatever that value labels, whatever that variable reference, I mean, number is going to be in Stata, for example, when you export it. So 0 is going to be, let's say, we're going to say elementary school. Or no, let's say no education. Maybe someone never had the opportunity to go to school. Elementary school, middle school, and then on and on and on. So again, this is what you want to make of it, right? So high school graduate, college graduate, or college. So it goes like that. And so, sorry about the misspelling. And then it goes on to professional degree. You can have as many categories as you want. Required, highest ed, identifier no. And then you can put a field note if you'd like. And then that's how you build that. And you can see the drop down. So it's really what is most useful for you to actually look at. Great. Let's do one more before I want to find one of the templates that I think is really helpful. So any other variables you guys want to throw out there? I'll just quickly go through. There's options for file uploads and stuff. Most of you aren't going to be using that. The things that I want you all to become familiar with are text boxes, multiple choice, drop-down list, radio button. Let's talk about checkboxes, multiple answers. So that one is interesting. So can anyone think of a situation in which you might need to have multiple answers for the same variable or question?
So Sapna, I can give a real life example.
Yeah.
We were doing a study just now on COVID where we were seeing patients who had COVID infection, and we were clicking each of the symptoms that they had, which was one of a short list. And then as we learned more about COVID, it became a much longer list.
Hey, absolutely. That's a perfect real life example. So, and I like now you guys are putting in some things that are very similar to what Dr. Jibo just offered, right? So let's call this just initial symptoms of COVID-19. Okay. So that's going to be the value label. COVID symptoms, COVID underscore SX. Required, yes. Identifier, no. Please select all that apply. All right. So I'm just going to throw in some random stuff. So 0, no symptoms, right? That would be a great reference, right? 1 could be runny nose, 2, sore throat, 3, trouble breathing. I'm just going off the cuff here. Lack of smell. Okay. So that would be, and you could go on and on, like Dr. Jibo was saying, you could make a very, very long list of things. So what is this going to end up looking like with the checkbox multiple answers? So what's going to happen here is it's going to give you the checkboxes. You can select as many as you want. And the important thing to note here is when it exports it into Stata, it's going to actually create separate variables for you. So essentially what it's going to be is 0 or 1 for no symptoms, 0 or 1 for runny nose. There's different ways of arranging it and you can play around with it. But that's a nice example, thank you, of having multiple options. And as you guys put advanced degrees, maybe you want to know all the different, does someone have an MD, a PhD, an MBA, a JD, they can select all that apply. Symptoms of a condition, which is exactly the example that we just gave. So while I'll let you guys continue to put stuff in the chat as you're thinking of them. I'm going to go back here because there was one form that I thought was a template that was really, really helpful. Let's see. Single survey. Bear with me for a second. My first instrument. No, that's not the one. Hold on. Training project. We did that. Oh, that's the same thing. Sorry about that, guys. Last one. Hold on. All right. Anything in the chat right now, Dr. Jibo? Do you see anything?
So symptoms of a condition and past medical history are the...
Oh, are the other ones. So symptoms of a condition, I think you basically substitute anything into the COVID options as a condition, and it would be a very similar setup. And past medical history, that's actually a really good one. So if you wanted to have a long list of things that the patient has, you guys have all been to the doctor's office where you have to check box, like, do you have hypertension? Do you have diabetes? So you could just create a long list of the other comorbidities. And that might be something that would be more appropriate, for example, for a survey. So let's look at the survey template. So this is what Andre Hackman has set up. So an example survey. And actually, even though this is a survey template, there's some really nice examples of different types of variables and options. And this is really, if you're planning a survey, absolutely use this as your baseline template. So you can see here, there's a participant ID, which will actually automatically be generated if you're doing a survey. If someone fills it out, they'll get an automatic participant ID. So that's not something that you actually modify. And then this is where you can say, select type of fields. I'm sorry, I wanted to edit this. So if you wanted to edit this, section 1, this is a survey about your exercise habits. Please complete all questions. Please complete all the questions below. And you can say, there's plenty of examples of what surveys look like, but that just in the interest of brevity. So multiple choice, this is a great one. So you can actually just substitute in, what is your gender? And then this is where you can start with 0. We recommend starting with 0. It just makes things a little bit easier. So, and then you can list the options and then change the variable name, and the templates are already set up. And the nice thing is you can actually, you can make a copy of this. So let's say you have multiple different variables that are going to look very similarly. You can actually just copy it and it'll show up as 2. You can also move stuff around. So if you wanted to move this field to another location, you can move it later. And then there was one that I think would be helpful for you guys, sliders. So you can actually set up sliders like for things that are like their own perception about something, pain scores, for example. If you have pain scores in a chart, though, you should just extract it as is. But if you're asking someone to rate their pain, or you have different categories, that's one way to do it. And then this is an example of a matrix of checkbox fields. So if you're setting up matrices where you're going like different days and you want to know about how whether they do gym or weight training on Monday and Tuesday, for example. And then finally, they have a branching logic little template here, which basically tells you how to do branching logic. So what is branching logic? Branching logic is essentially if you don't need someone to fill out every question because it's predicated on whether or not the answer is yes or no to a previous question. So that's a little bit of an advanced skill. It's really important if you're using branching logic in surveys, especially, that you've tested it out thoroughly. It's kind of outside the scope of this specific session, but essentially, if you have a yes/no question, for example, did you graduate from medical school? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, then you don't need to ask them a bunch of other questions about what they did after graduating from medical school. But branching logic will help you send them to the appropriate spot. So if the answer is no, they skip these following questions and they go to the next question that's appropriate for them. So I'm going to pause there. I've given, again, just like this data overview, it's a whirlwind overview, not intended to be complete of all different circumstances, but we have a few minutes before you guys head off to your one-to-ones and different activities to do a couple other example variables if you'd like to work with those. Or you can unmute and ask a question if it's not specific to a variable. No? All right, well, I'm going to then, if there are no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording in a second, and then I will share this again, this link with all of you. You know, do reach out at any point in time. I'm happy to be a point person if you have random questions, and I'll get you pointed in the right direction, but you can see that there's tons of resources there. Meredith or Kelly or Steve, any other questions, comments, concerns?
A huge
That was
thank you.
fantastic. What a
That
great
was.
summary. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Terrific job, Sapna. Thank you.
You can tell I kind of love REDCap. So, all right, sounds good. I'm going to stop recording. Thanks all. Enjoy your one-to-ones and getting your projects going, and good luck with everything. Okay.
So
right.
can I just make one quick announcement while everybody's here?
Yeah.
So each of your advisors is going to talk to you about what's coming up for the summer. One of the things to be thinking about is using our biostatistical help and REDCap help. So we have engaged with a lot of others around the university who can help you. We are here to advocate for you. I know that some of you have asked, at least in my small group, to talk to your mentors. We are happy to do that. So please make sure to take advantage of us over the next 8 weeks as you're beginning your adventure. The other thing we all feel strongly about is that you take vacation. I know I talked about this with my group. I know that my co-leads also feel strong that you do this. Just make sure you tell your mentors when you're going to be gone so they don't expect you to be there. And try to make sure that you get some time away from Zoom. We are all encouraging of that. We've been on Zoom for too long as well. And just want to make sure you have a really great summer between first and second year. So this is the last time that we're all going to be together. But thank you, Sapna, for a terrific lecture. And thank you to all of you for your attendance. Steve, Meredith, I don't know if you have any other comments you want to make.
No, I think that's a good message to leave on. Thank you, Dr. Gibo.
Perfect, guys. Have a great summer.
All right. Bye, guys. Thanks.